citations based on your material.
Okay.
And this is something that we've gone into several times, but the issue is if you have the proper documentation, date and time stamped on a digital photograph, you as the person that took the photograph can bring that to the annex court and have the charges brought, just like us. Now see, this is where we're going with the nuisance dog though. Because if it's admissible and you bring it to us, we can start the nuisance dog proposals, which will allow us to address the situation directly. So you do have the option of bringing your own, such, for example, citizens arrests. Okay.
That's exactly the type of scenario that led to us to say we need the nuisance designation. We need to use.
That's where we're going.
To use that type of material that you all are already.
Okay. And then real quickly, back on the pet groomer set, 6-126, suspending the pet services facilities license, suspended for not providing necessary food, care, shelter. These are the minimum standards we talked about. Why would that not apply to every applicant or every citizen in the city, regardless of their business arrangement, profit, nonprofit, with a vet clinic? If that is a minimum standard, why would that just not apply to every single party in this room or in this process? Why would that only apply to a licensee who is a board? Okay.
It doesn't. It doesn't apply to everyone.
It does apply to everyone?
Is the question about cruelty? Is that what you're asking?
The standards that they're having multiple, if you're saying like a foster group or something like that, they still have to have the permit. There's a fee waiver there, but they still have to keep the animals in the same standards. Okay? And everybody has to keep care, has to fill within the individual owners. 6.6 is the care and keeping ordinance, which really have.
To make sure I understood what you said though, so a foster who's not a foster group, who's not required to be licensed under the ordinance, has to meet the standard regardless.
No, they always were.
Okay.
They always were. There's just a waiver of the fees. Okay. So foster groups and humane organizations are going to be covered by the commercial pet facility in that they are going to be held to the same standards, but they don't have to pay for the license. That's the way it is.
I mean, at the end of the day, a foster is assisting in helping animals get into homes, right?
And to go to a point that Chris was made earlier, 6.6, and I think Jim and I talked for everybody else, we talked for about an hour yesterday. I think there might be some value, Jim. We've got these standards that apply to everybody that owns an animal. We've got it in 6.6, you've got it in state animal cruelty laws, you've got it at the federal level. Perhaps our product might be improved by saying, look, here are the non-negotiables up front. Perhaps that's an improvement. Make sure that that's explicitly understood. Everybody knows about it. In one place, this is where you can go look. You cannot do these 3 things, regardless of whether or not it's articulated elsewhere in our code, health and safety code, federal legislation, whatever. Like we talked about, I think
the only final thing I want to say is we appreciate your time and we want to work with you personally and professionally. This is a big issue. There's a lot of moving parts and we just look forward to it.
And like we've got, I think, some improvements that we're going to make to the definition of ownership that were directly related to what you brought up. I think we've got some improvements that we're going to make to the rules and regulations section of the commercial pet service facility license that we're going to make. We're still talking about the kind of broader philosophical conversation that we had about both rules and about the permit scheme. Okay. Thank you for all this.
Thank you.
You've largely addressed the issue with impact dogs now, but whatever regulation you come up with, be aware that we have hundreds of people bringing in thousands of dogs every year to compete in various events in the city. So you're not going to have a use and registration or use and license.
Right. And that's a defense to licensing right now. That's already an affirmative defense to the licensing requirement. If you come in 30 days or less, right? If you're in town for 30 days or less.
Are we still on the breeding stuff, or are we moving on? Or
Do
is
it
it just open now?
Sure.
Okay.
And then I'll
regarding 6126, we talked a little bit about this last time, and so I had people texting me questions that weren't able to attend tonight. So I wanted to ask about Section 126A, number 3, unsanitary conditions exist to such an extent that those conditions create a possible medium for the transmission of disease to the animals kept there or to human beings. So if we could get a better definition of what diseases we're talking about, because kennel cough happens in doggy daycare, in boarding facilities, and training facilities. It's terrible with the animal that it happens, but is this what we're talking about at this point? Because what other things could be?
So I think, you know, as someone who runs a shelter that houses 524 animals, this morning we brought in about 112 today, right? I think I agree with you, this language is probably too big, right? Because transmission of upper respiratory infection is going to happen, right? I mean, I'd love to say at Bark we don't have it, but every kennel, no matter how small, you're going to have upper respiratory infection. I use the example when I was in basic training, it was the cleanest environment I've ever lived in. 60 guys living in close confinement, we were all coughing and sniffling and sneezing, but everything was clean all the time, right? Upper respiratory infection is going to happen. I think what we're trying to do here is, if you have a dog that is spraying parvo, we know how they spray parvo, right? And you're not addressing that. You're moving dogs in and out of your kennel, and we're getting calls all the time about, hey, my dog has got parvo, and this person's dog has parvo, and this person's dog has parvo. And we say, hey, we come out there, and sure enough, man, there's parvo like everywhere, and you're not addressing it. That's a problem.
I think it goes to, do we get a complaint? My dog got sick. I know of 2 other people whose dogs got sick from this place. And from those complaints, we go out and we find the place is just filthy. Which has many times. But we find that there's no evidence that the kennels are being cleaned or
even if
the air is being allowed to stagnate.
And we may need to add this in here as well. I mean, if we don't have, you can't show cleaning protocols or a regimen of some kind where you're addressing the spread of disease or disease control on any level, that would be a problem, right? I mean, clearly you're not operating kennel in any good standard.
Because
I agree with you. We probably need to look at this language and be a little more specific. I don't know that we should name every possible disease that could possibly spread. We may want to, I mean, upper respiratory infection is going to happen. I don't know if we want to look at maybe excluding that. But I think we probably need to put in here better language as far as, because the truth is, if you handle a dog that you didn't know had ringworm, right, and now you have ringworm, was that intentional? Was that your fault? Maybe, probably not, right? Probably not.
no, it's
So-
going to be on your clothes, and you're going to go to the next dog.
Correct.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, so
this is one of those situations where, kind of going back to the hobby breed, that somebody offers a definition. I've heard Charles's response and Chris Pierre's response to that. If somebody has some language that they want to suggest, or I mean, they don't need to play lawyer. They just think about these things, send them to us.
okay.
I mean, at the end of the day, Chris, all we're trying to do is if there's habitual and, you know, people are, every time an animal goes there, somebody's getting sick, we want to be able to go in there and find out what's going on, whether it's kennel cough or whatever.
Yeah, and
this might be a
filthy
filthy
clean,
place.
and we realize that.
We just want to clean, you know, encourage them to get clean.
Sorry, Greg, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's all right, sorry.
But if we show up and we realize that this is just an angry customer who tried to hurt you in some fashion, and, you know, we get people all the time, their animals are healthy, marked, they have respiratory infection, they say it's the dirtiest shelter on the planet. Well, I go toe to toe with them any day, right? I can show you we clean 540 cages every single day, 7 days a week, without missing a single one. And I can show you the processes in place and how we do that, the regular kennel inspections that I give my employees that they hate because I tear them apart, military style, right? But I can show you all that, right? And, you know, if we come in there and you're not, which I'm not saying be at that level, but you can't produce that. And you're showing, hey, yeah, 3 or 4 cases of parvo came out of your kennel in a week, and you're not addressing that at all, we have a problem.
All right.
And I think the language we can probably look at this language.
The other thing is we are pretty experienced in investigating kennels and also doing the inspections on them. We can tell the difference between a good faith effort and neglect. And that's pretty much what we're going to be looking at.
And we send
If we
senior
found
officers
that
out to do this. We don't just send, you know, new guys and
like to address the milch goats.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I'd like to ask a couple questions so that my comments would be more relevant. Define milch goat for me. Thank you. Your justification for no longer letting them be allowed was that nobody has applied for a permit in 10 years. Are you therefore saying that no milch goats exist?
No?
No, but the fact is that goats have been prohibited in the city of Houston for about 40 years.
Okay.
The milk goat was exempt from that with the permit. The permit was based on the 100-foot designation as well. And the thing with the 100-foot is that there are very few properties on Houston that can actually qualify for that. So
But the few that do,
it's more or less an obsolete permit.
yes, but the few properties that do meet the 100-foot guideline are being obfuscated as well, though.
We don't believe so.
Nobody's applying.
Well, that, I mean, post hoc ergo propter hoc, you know, just because this doesn't exist doesn't automatically prove the case that no goats exist. But I just want to let that be known, but if that's the justification.
The flow was, the logical flow, right? Goats are prohibited, special provision for milch goats. There's been this permit that's been in existence. No one has applied for such a permit. We see no rational basis to preserve the permit if it's not being used or utilized.
So, in punishment of the people who have milk goats, since you're not applying for your permits regularly, we're taking away your privilege, is what you're saying.
I mean, goats are prohibited anyway.
Not milch goats.
Right.
I think they are unless you have the permit.
Okay. And then a second thing that I would like
Take away the
to...
milk goats, we are.
Yes.
Then a second comment dealing with the goats is that raw goat's milk is not available and cannot, just saying that goat's milk is available to consumers in the city is not a justification for eliminating that as well. I think there needs to be more sensitivity to the people that are trying to take the production of their own food back into their own hands and giving them more power to actually do that and giving them more inclusive codes to allow them to do it, not take them away or make it more restrictive. That's just my comment.
I think I'll take the opportunity to, when responding to that question, just to talk a little bit about what we're not talking about tonight, which is hens.
Well, I wanted to talk about that next. But
Well, I think that's a growing, it's an emerging trend for sure in certain aspects, certain areas of the city. And
Chris, can we just do some look-see and see what's going on with milch goats throughout, other cities in the state and so forth?
yeah, sure.
Let's just take a peek.
Well, I mean, we look at
I don't want to
that.
punish anybody, but
Help
I
us.
want to also have something on the books that we're never going to do anything with.
Help it right now. Right now, we see no need to keep this thing because nobody's coming to us. So help us get a better understanding.
all I'm
of the
saying,
demand of this.
yeah,
And
and
that would be helpful.
I'm not disagreeing with you. All I'm saying is the justification for removing the allowance is not germane. It doesn't prove the point. There hasn't been it's just that we might need to make it where people who have goats should be more careful about applying for their permits. I know goats exist in the city. Not mine, I don't have them, but I do know they exist.
We're
I'm-
making a note.
Can I
Yeah.
ask
No, I mean, I don't have
Hey,
those,
Lester,
but-
what was the reasoning behind having the milch goats be allowed to have a permit? What was the utility for it?
Utility for it was to allow people that wanted to have milk from goats to have them in the city, but they did have to have a medical certification. They were free from brucellosis. They also had to fit within the distance restrictions. So essentially, if you have enough property to keep a cow, you could keep a milk goat. But the problem the reason from what I've been able to find out in research why the goats weren't allowed in the first place was because there's far more nuisance issues with goats than there are with other kinds of animals that are in the livestock category. So that's why they were.
And I'm not disagreeing, but the only justification I have heard was that no permit has been applied for in 10 years.
And look, that's kind of, we're a department that tries to look at things and say, one of the first things that we did as a department after we were created was do an evaluation on a bicycle permit. Wasn't being utilized. It was no one was applying for it. There was essentially no reason to have the permit. So please see it in kind of the way that we look at things. We've got a permit that's not being applied for. Why do we have this?
Maybe,
Right.
maybe people don't know they have to.
Yeah, how do you know?
No doubt, guys, I hear that. Help us get a better understanding. We're gonna look at what other jurisdictions do, both in Texas, and elsewhere with respect to mulch codes. Help us get a better understanding of the amount of people this would impact. And we'll go from there.
May I
But I
address?
take your point. So let me just talk about hens. We're not addressing hens right now. We have, and I don't think there are that many people that are concerned with this subject here, but there are at least a few. Hens for Houston is an organization that approached us and requested changes because they, like the conversation we just had with hens, with goats rather, they'd like to go back to producing their own food or just, and they said, we've had stakeholder meetings with them going back a year and a half. And some of them have said, look, we just like to keep them as pets, independent of whether or not they're refused. So we worked up some draft language. We had a number of meetings with them over the course of several months and came up with some draft language. And essentially where we are with that is, we've acted in good faith, and what the mayor has said is that if and when a sufficient number of council members want to consider this, then we'll consider it. So it's a sales job that's got, the council offices have the draft that we worked up to allow hens to kind of meet our needs to preserve public welfare and their needs to be able to keep hens and that type of thing. But I'll tell you that the majority of council members still have serious reservations about whether or not that's appropriate for their district. And that's kind of where we are. And Hens for Houston has been well advised that that's the situation and what the deal is. And it's a massive communication issue that they're confronted with, quite frankly. There's a lot of folks that it's not appropriate, I don't think, because folks that aren't up to speed on what the regulations are here and they're be allowed, and they don't appreciate or may not want to appreciate that there's permitting steps that have to be, hoops that have to be jumped through to go within that 100-foot designation, as we've described it, and that type of thing. They have to be permitted with us. The permit can be revoked if people don't act appropriately. They think about, we've got so many problems in my neighborhood already. I've already got hens and roosters, and there's 20 of them right next door, and they don't stay on their property, and you want to make it easier for people to have them. That's what the council members
Chris,
are
at the end of the day,
responding
with the mulch thing, I mean, if we'll figure this out, if we already looked through it, we'll put a cost of service involved with this thing. It could be $500 to get a permit. I don't know, I mean, it just depends upon how much resource it takes from us to go check it out.
But help us, so we're going to look at it, help us get a better understanding of latent demand. Yes, so I neglected to write my email. I've told you all a couple of times, email stuff. So there's my, it's Christopher. If it's difficult to read, Christopher.Newport, like beach, at HoustonTX.gov. Email it to me. I share everything with our internal group that's working on it. Yes, ma'am.
I have some concerns about the definition of aggressive dog and nuisance dog. Like number 3, it says interfering with the freedom of movement on persons in a public right-of-way. The dog doesn't even have to be out of the yard, and somebody can say that it scared him or something, and that can be considered an aggressive dog. Or like the nuisance dog, that if your dog is barking at someone walking by, which that's my dog's job. I don't want him to continue and sit and gap. But his job is to keep people from coming to my house. So if one of the animal control officers come by, they see that my dog's going to bark at you because that's his job. If he's not yapping all the time, how are they going to know whether he's actually an aggressive dog or whether he's just doing his job?
Hey fellas, have you ever picked somebody's dog up for barking through a fence? Ever?
Well, there's a reasonable standard for the bark.
It's got to be a large.
Yeah, ma'am.
No, but that's not what the law
barking.
That's
Yeah,
not what it
that's the
says.
problem.
It can be in a fenced yard, and if
I'm
it
saying
charges the fence.
from a practical standpoint,
Yeah.
we've never done that.
But then it shouldn't be in writing
Chris,
that it can be done.
Yeah, so
noise.
So I'll ask Chris and Jared to comment on the impingement of someone's ability to use the right of way. But let's talk about the parking. This public nuisance section refers over to 30-3.
I'm sorry, what?
30-3, as does the commercial. Any citation for a loud animal would be written pursuant to section 30-3, which in chapter 30 is where the noise and sound regulations are codified for the city of Houston. And that section of the noise ordinance essentially gives some flexibility to the officer. They have to consider such things as intensity of the sound, the duration that the sound was being made, the time of day, those types of things. And like, I don't remember who said that there's a reasonable person standard that applies to it. That's not quite a term of art, but it is near to that in legal language. So it is not the case. An animal would not be designated as a nuisance dog because it's doing its job and it's alerting to someone that's unfamiliar walking in front of its fence. What we're talking about is, and I just want to remind everyone that it's not bark that makes the determination. We can submit via citation or a recommendation to a hearing officer that a hearing be conducted to determine whether or not that dog is a nuisance. But a hearing officer that works for the municipal courts department is going to look at our recommendation. We're going to hear from the person that's the owner of the dog, any witnesses that that owner might bring forward, and that's the appeal process. So there's room for additional input. Can you talk about, sorry, I didn't give you an example of what would result the barking. We're talking about someone leaves their dog out all night. Perhaps they leave it tied all night and it just barks and it howls and they just don't bring it in. That's what we're talking about.
It's more neglect issue.
Yeah.
With the barking, and there, and you know, I can't say that there's going to be enforcement by different agencies besides HPD on barking, obviously, but there's going to be different standards that we're going to look at as far as what's causing the barking. Our idea isn't to go out there and punish you and your dog. Our idea is to try to alleviate the nuisance, and that's what this is about. We're not going to give you, we're not going to cite you or anything like that as far as it goes. The nuisance, you are to alleviate the nuisance. That's what the punishment is.
So is there a penalty associated with the determination itself?
No, there's a penalty that can be brought if they violate.
Right. So, and I think this is an important distinction. Your dog can be determined to be a public nuisance or aggressive dog, but the offense only occurs if, subsequent to that determination, whatever issue or nuisance is underlying that determination is allowed to continue. Right? So you refuse to bring the animal in at night. You refuse to repair the board in your fence that it's shooting through. Those types of things. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about one of you guys about impingement of the use of the right of way?
I was going to say, if your dog can stick his head out of a fence and it causes somebody to have to go around, that's a nuisance. That's what I was going to mention earlier.
Just to find some, these guys do some weird stuff.
There's also apartment buildings and things of that nature that people allow their dogs loose on essentially common ground. We get a lot of issues with home communities. This allows us to address that because the owner lets their dog loose on what they consider to be their property that is actually common ground. There's a lot of different variables that we have to be able to really, and this allows us.
Do you have to investigate every call you go on?
Well, we have to investigate every call we go on. We cannot possibly investigate every call we do. And the reason is because we don't have these. We only have altogether 13 field officers, 3 trainees, and 2 senior officers, and Jared and I. We get 400 calls a day. We cannot possibly.
We'll be having a
investigate
conversation.
everyone we are able to.
If somebody calls in and said there's an aggressive dog, so you would go and investigate each one of those? Because I'm thinking somebody can call and on their neighbor because they didn't like them and say that dog's aggressive, so you're gonna have to go out there even if you deem it not as an aggressive dog.
Well, it's not real different than what we're doing now. There's no real difference in what we're doing.
I mean, the
now.
majority of
Still
dogs,
is
by and
finding
large,
some price based on
Dogs
the
have
severity.
Dogs gotta be loose.
I mean, we deal with, all the time, these guys deal with dogs and animals that are really being used as pawns as part of the
And I think to answer your question better, they have a priority scheme that they use as far as how they answer calls, right? So depending upon the severity of the call, that's how it gets input in the system, and that's how they pick up calls. So the top priority calls are going to get answered, the lower priority calls probably.
Okay, we're going to go right now.
It seems to me that the problem with the breeder issue, and I'm speaking of myself, even though I will, in the interest of full disclosure, state that I'm legislative liaison for the Cavalier King Charles Spaniel Club of Greater Houston.
For which?
The Cavalier King Charles Spaniel Club of Greater Houston. I used to be the rescue chair. I am very familiar with rescue operations and adoption. I've been to BARC. I've seen the people walk in there with rabbits, puppies, and dogs. It seems to me that the issue here is not commercial versus non-commercial breeding. The issue is responsible breeding versus irresponsible breeding.
Yes.
One of the things that really troubled me in my visits to BARC is I wasn't sure exactly how you all are tracking these people who are dumping animals off. Because the reality is, when I did rescue, not one single one of our club breeders' dogs ever went through a shelter or ever went through a rescue group because they were microchipped and they were tracked. And if they ended up in some sort of rescue facility, there was an automatic notation that goes back to the breeder, period. In 25 plus years, we've not had a single one run through. What is BARC doing to stop irresponsible breeding? Because I saw people walk in there all the time who clearly were not getting their dogs spayed neutered.
Well, one thing is they get, I mean, the whole point of this exercise of our proposals is to give us a tool to be able to do something, because we don't have the authority currently to do something about it.
So you're not tracking the names and addresses of these people who are dumping animals?
That's incorrect. So what happens is when somebody turns in an animal in park, they have to provide with us identification. We absolutely record every single person who turns in an animal to us. Now, if you do it, if you're an owner surrender, if you come in and you dump a basket full of puppies, we mark you no adopt. So in the future, you can't come back to us and adopt from us again. You've already demonstrated the ability to take care of your animals. But every single animal that gets turned in, whoever brought the animal in, we absolutely report who they are. Now, every animal that gets adopted from us is spayed, neutered, microchipped, every single one at BARC. So yes, we are doing that.
But why aren't you targeting those people who are dumping those animals on you at BARC?
Because they claim it's not their animal.
Well, yeah,
All you're
because
doing is
claiming
saying
it's
they're
a
not
stray.
going to adopt
Well,
you.
and it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier. When people bring in baskets of animals, right, a lot of times they lie. They're embarrassed that it's their animal. So we ask them, is this your animal? And they'll say, no. Now, they're good with kids, and this is Fluffy, and this is Snickers, and this is so-and-so, and all this. But they're not mine. I just found them on the side of the road. Please find them at home. They start crying, right? So I cannot say, you liar. Those are your animals, right? You tell me now, right? So they're strays. We categorize them as strays. We mark them in the computer strays because that's what we know. I don't think, and sometimes we have repeat offenders, right? I see regulars who come in with baskets, full of puppies, and we can ask them, hey, I mean, obviously they're running a breeding operation, and if I have that information, I give it to the ACOs. Anytime we see cruelty come to the front, we give it to our animal control officers. They get HPD involved, whoever they need to get involved. I mean, we do that all the time.
Isn't that per se cruelty, dumping a bucket of puppies at your shelter?
Well, I think it's cool. I think it's cool, but no.
I think it's,
Not by.
it's nice to have them dumped on the street or killed. I mean,
Well,
wouldn't we
this
rather
is-
someone?
That's actually against the law, not bringing it to a shelter. Dump inside the van, it's against the law.
So
The other thing is that as far as the punishment,
It's gonna be okay, it's
people
enforced.
bring them in, right now, it's not a violation. There's nothing in the law that allows us to
But
prosecute.
instead of going after those people, those very narrow group of people who are taking advantage of the city's shelter system, you're instead targeting a broad group of people who may otherwise be engaged in legal activities.
Well,
And I really kind of resent one of the comments that one of your officers made previously, there should be no breeding at all within the city of Houston. Because that's really not your right to decide.
So what I hope, what I hope is that you would take to heart and as serious what we said when we started off the Q&A, which was we've heard the most feedback about this specific issue, and we We know that there are important distinctions that perhaps we didn't appreciate when we were describing commercial versus non-commercial, and that we are not interested in impinging on the rights of people that are already responsible. What we are interested in is getting people that aren't responsible to stop being responsible. So we said that right at the top, and that we know that we've got additional work to do. We've already received some really good ideas about how to improve what we have. If you have additional ideas about how to improve what we have, I'd love to hear about it. We know that we have what to do. We're not trying to say, it's quite frankly, we don't have the resources. This is like the revisions that were made to the kennel, the formal kennel license. That was like everybody could potentially be in violation. Well, now with the commercial pet service facility, it's like this, laser focus on those three things with the fourth thing on the other. So if you've got suggestions about, we'll be updating the drafts as we go through. If you've got suggestions on ways that we can improve what we have, we'd love to hear it. And there's my email address. We haven't heard from Julie yet, then I will go,
I'm just very short.
What's your name?
Lynn.
Lynn, I'm going to go to you after Julie, then we'll go Lisa, then we'll go to you.
I think I heard you say at some point, or maybe you said this several times, we don't have the resources. All of the monies that are, let's say in the future, because of the ordinances that are accumulated, fees, license, commercial pet facility, license operational costs, and all these fees, are all these fees directly set aside by the City of Houston's budget for BARC?
That's a great question. Thank you. Yes, is the short answer. One of the things that we did back in 2010 was shortly after we took over BARC, was we recommended that BARC be set aside in the budget as a special revenue fund. So all revenues that are created by BARC, by fees, any revenues that are received by BARC via donations are held aside, and they can only be used by BARC. You cannot divert that to pay for CIP projects, operating costs for other departments. We're not paying for stop signs. We're not doing anything like that. What we're using those monies for are to do things like hire additional outreach staff, hire additional staff so that the animals get cared for more hours of the day. These are things that we've done. Do new things that can fund new projects like the Healthy Pets Off the Streets initiative. That's an example of donation rather that's being wholly funded by donation. So thank you for that. Every dime that is paid for a license fee, for an adoption fee, that's donated, stays at BARC. It is legally impermissible to transfer it from BARC for some other use.
Yeah,
I just have a short thing on section 151 definitions on aggressive and public nuisance dogs. And number 1, has attacked or bitten any person or other animal without provocation. Should that not be domestic animal? The reason I bring this up is I had dogs and terriers that are, I had master earth dogs. They're trained hunting dogs. Can and will take out the occasional possum in the back.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We had that. That point was, and I've got 2 rather large dogs that unfortunately like stray cats. It's terrible. But and possums too.
Domestic animal?
Yeah, we received that feedback today on the conference call, and we're going to make that adjustment. And I was going to go to this.
I have,
Neely?
yes. I have 3 questions. And follow up again to same section, section 6126. Yeah, because if you over him now, y'all look a big deal. If we could, just thought of it. Okay, so back to 3.
What are the questions?
Complaints. So we talked a little bit last week or at the last meeting about how complaints are going to be handled once a complaint is called into BARC about a facility, a pet care facility. How will the pet care facility be made aware that 1, 2, or 3 complaints have been made, therefore Jared and Chris are coming out? Or are they just going to show up?
Just show up.
Because wouldn't it be better than, just showing up is giving the pet care facility owner the opportunity to resolve whatever issue may be in the neighborhood?
And that's what we're doing when we show up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
here's the situation, right? So let's say we suspected animal cruelty, and I called you and said, hey, I'm on your way over to your facility, right?
Well, no, I don't
Clean-
mean like that, yeah.
Clean up, get all the animals out, you know, let's get them. We show up like, oh man, it's peachy, everything's great. Right, so I think what they're going to do is they're going to come out, they're going to see the conditions, no notice for you, just like the customer would.
Well,
They're gonna see it. And then, you know, they're going to give you, they're going to say, hey, look, these things are out of line, right? And you're going to say, hey, I'm going to fix these things. And whatever they decide on, they're going to cite you well.
Let me be more specific. I'm talking about nuisance barking, that kind of thing, not animal cruelty, those types of things. So in other words, if a neighbor is complaining that the dogs are really loud out there and it's, you know, impinging on their enjoyment of their, you know, home or whatever, wouldn't it be better at that point than to, hey, you know, we've gotten a couple of calls, you know, at 7 o'clock at night or whatever, it's interrupting dinner, blah, 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 giving them an opportunity versus,
Nothing precludes that.
Yeah.
okay.
Our answer is we're going to respond to it pretty much the way we respond to other complaints of similar nature.
Okay.
We're going to investigate the complaint and find out if there's a basis for it and address it on what we see and what we find when we go out there. That's the only fair way to do it, because we have a complaint, someone has an issue with the resident. We can go out there and explain what the situation is and work with you. The idea is that we're going to work with you to try to get you to keep your license. The idea is not to shut down your operation.
With that being said, we're not getting any calls on any of the kennels.
Right, but if we do, that's the way it's going to be handled. It's not going to be out there as a punitive measure. Look, we got one we can shut down, that's not that.
Okay. Then, we also talked about last time, and so I'm confused by something that was stated tonight. And so if a citation is issued, whether it's nuisance